So it has become very common to talk about AI-driven measurement, like how to use ChatGPT or Claude for different kinds of analytics exercises. Even advanced measurement techniques like testing are supposedly becoming easier through Gen AI. They are to an extent, but probably very differently than the way it is often being touted. So, for instance, a lot of the measurement vendors have released MCPs, and then there are others who are also releasing different kinds of repo systems or AI brains, which are supposedly going to be used by marketing analysts without understanding too much. They can just start asking simple questions in natural language by connecting these with the LLMs like ChatGPT or Claude. And I'm going to show you an example now where Claude has actually failed miserably, and the failure is often silent. It's not that it's going to tell you that I cannot do it or it's going to make an obvious error. Again, this is not going to be the only case. There have been so many other cases of Claude failing silently. So let's dive into the example right now. So the first question that I shared to it from a Google Ads account, I exported some data. So for certain reasons, this is the only approach that's possible. I'm not getting into that, like PNL is not available and all of that, but I shared with it some data and I wanted to understand what has been the correlation between Google Ads spend and overall profitability, new customer profits. So in that sense, like what has been the level of incrementality of Google Ads spend? This is of course not the best method of doing this to understand incrementality. I've talked in my channel about other proper incrementality tests, but let's just go with the flow here. So the initial analysis, the data I shared with it was simply Google Ads data and NC profit data. And I saw that the analysis that it gave, Claude gave a reasonably decent analysis. So analysis wise, it was fine. Like it did 4 kinds of analysis. So first was a level correlation, so same day spend versus profit. And then there was also a lagged one and incremental day over day delta one. And then there was for the specific range that I was interested in, because there was a question that for a higher level of spend than what has been normally in the recent period, would it really be feasible? Would it really be incremental to have that level of spend from Google in this account? For these different levels, for these different kinds of analysis, this was the kind of output that it shared, a time series analysis. It was okay. I also asked it to repeat it for total spend. I asked it to repeat for total revenues. It did those same things. And then there was a certain bracket analysis, of course. So it's basically telling us for each of these cases with Google Ad spend versus NC profit, with total spend and NC profit, with Google Ad spend, revenue, different kinds of permutations. And for each of these is telling us, like in which of these spend brackets on an average, the number of cases that it could find for the different spend brackets and what was the average profit for each of those spend brackets. So it was a pretty decent breakdown. Again, extremely correlational, as you can understand. This definitely cannot be called an incremental kind of analysis, but yeah, in the absence of better alternatives, this is what I had to go with. And this time I also asked it to do a revenue analysis and also the same question, and then it gave a nice comparison, like Google spend, mean revenue, mean profit, and implied cost base. So what it's trying to say, like implied cost base is really just revenue minus profit, and we saw that in this case that there was much stronger correlation with mean revenue than with mean profit. So for 600 to 800, that's where the mean profit was the highest apparently. Up to this was really great, and then I spotted the first mistake. So the problem was that the chart was really nice and it was correct. It was giving the right kind of breakdown. Where it actually went wrong was how it described it in text inside of the chat. So it carried out a different analysis for the chart, and the data that it shared, the analysis it shared within the chat, within the conversation itself, that was different. So I spotted that error. And I told it, hey, this is different. And this actually arose because Claude was using different bin boundaries, essentially. Just because of the bins, it was giving for 800 to 1000 in one case, and it was giving 800 to 1200 in one case. So naturally the variation happened. So you can see that it never mentioned that it was the case. Then I spotted the second, again, not really a mistake as it turns out, but the thing that there wasn't any clarity. So I asked it that you have said that it's going to be for 60 days, but I see when I sum up the number of days in the chart specifically, that when you look at the n equals numbers, that it sums up to 46. So what happened to the 14 days? So then it says that I actually did not use that last bracket, which was much higher, and I just went ahead and dropped those 14 days. So it silently just left it out. So suppose you were to share it, someone were to just share it based on the outputs from here, that you would say there's 60 days, but from the chart itself, and if you hadn't cross-checked it, there was absolutely no flag from Claude whatsoever. It would have been 46. So you would have been faced with that question. It would have been in a very uncomfortable situation if you shared it with any kind of stakeholder, really. Then I asked it a couple of smaller things, but then I went on to ask the most important question, like what do you recommend is going to be the sweet spot based on all this analysis. And it does mention like above 1200 range is actually interesting, but it then goes on to mention, which was the real problem, like 800 to 1000 band is clearly in the danger zone. That it mentions that it says that confirmed across every analysis, both data sources, revenue drops, profit collapses to near zero. This suggests the account hits some kind of efficiency cliff around 800, where incremental spend stop converting well before reconverting at higher budgets. Just think about it, like suppose up to 600 a day of Google ad spend, the account is responding well to it, and then suddenly from 600 to 800, or rather from 800 to 1000, up to 800 it was doing fine, from 800 to 1000, for suddenly between in this range, for just a couple of £100 of range, it suddenly drops, the performance falls, and then again from 1000 onwards it again recovers, right? It struck me immediately, like what kind of a strange analysis is that? And there had to be other explanations for it. Of course that was the case, we could see that was the case, but either it was just lack of sufficient data and it's just noise, or it could have been like other factors which coincided with the fact that it was just coincidental that we also have that range of 800 to 1000 during those specific periods, on those specific days, as it turns out, when we had something else going on in the account, maybe in other channels, or maybe at an offer level, or maybe in the website. Something else was happening, or a microeconomic or a macroeconomic external factor. But none of this was presented in the analysis by Claude. So then I charged it, like, could you really explain, like, what could be the logic of suddenly 800 to 1000 range becoming unprofitable? Isn't it just an artifact of noise more than any trend? Given at higher spends, we have several days when mean profit was really good. And then it says that it is most likely noise, and you're right to question that. There's a statistical case for it being noise, like n equal to 13 days. That's not a lot of days. And even the higher brackets, they have only a few days. With this much variance in daily profit, the mean of any small bucket is highly sensitive to just 2 or 3 of outlier days. So rather than this being a genuine dead zone, what you're most likely seeing is a confounding variable, a day type, or a campaign state. And other factors like bid strategies could have been in a learning phase. It was a weekday with the naturally conversion intent, a campaign that had been scaled and hadn't yet found efficient traffic. The spend was ramping up through that range transitionally rather than being held there deliberately. Different kinds of possibilities that it mentioned only after I asked it this question, really. I challenged it. So then I said it again. I followed up once more. Like, why did you say all these things in the previous response? Avoid this range of 800 to 1000 as a settling point. If you're scaling up from 600 to 800, push through that band rather than landing in it. Like, why really? So fair challenge, it says. I was overconfident that I shouldn't have said it so definitively. There was a clustering issue, there was a noise issue, and it's only after that I just figured out that that's possibly noise as well. So then it says a strange thing, and it's very important. This is what I really wanted to hit. Like, the core problem is I shifted between two modes: rigorous analyst when running the numbers, then overconfident advisor when summarizing. So the numbers warranted more hedging than the recommendations reflected. Good catch. So yeah, I know that's a good catch, but the point is that why didn't Claude identify it? So again, the thing is that it's not about Claude not being capable. It's that it has all the information, probably, but it may not always have everything, but it has a lot of ideas and capability. But you really have to be constantly on it, keep it on its toes, and you have to be very vigilant. So you have to figure out like where exactly it can go wrong, and this is not always easy to understand. You can see that here there was no real reason why it should have got this wrong, right? At least from this conversation it's not clear, but I'll give you some clues where it could have been different. The conversation could have gone differently, like it may not have made those mistakes. I should have shared the dates, or rather the day of week, not just the dates and the spends and the NC profits. So if you look at my original data that I shared with it, this didn't contain the day of the week, but it did contain the date. So it should have really just also identify the day of the week itself, to be honest, because it does have the date, right? When you're saying that it's the 1st of May or the 1st of June, it should be able to figure out, because it already knows how to understand calendars, identify day of week from just a calendar date. But again, it didn't do it, right? So it's possible that it will not do it. So for instance, whenever you're creating prompts for this kinds of analysis, always include the day of week, or mention it that do check out for day of week effect, because in D2C brands especially, I work with a lot of mid-market D2C brands, it's extremely common to actually have this sort of a problem. So definitely do mention that. Do mention all these kinds of things, like any other factors which may not be immediately apparent in the analysis. Also include those in the prompts, that ask Claude to keep an eye out for these kinds of things also affecting the analysis, or while giving you recommendations. Especially when you ask it to give a recommendation, do ask it to be mindful of those things. But to be honest, if you ask me, like, decision making is very different than pattern recognition. You can recognize all the patterns, but you can still make wrong decisions. And I think what Claude has done here is something that even a junior analyst could do. So as an expert analyst, as the expert human analyst, you would have to be prepared to make interventions like this and be very vigilant of the kind of responses or the kind of decisions, because ultimately this decision should be by you, but you can definitely ask for it for the recommendations as well. But for me, Claude has been the best when it comes to technical capabilities, and even Claude is prone to making these mistakes. I hope this was useful. This was a very specific example, but again, this is something that I've repeatedly found. This is not just one case. This is not just a one-off incidence of a silent failure from Claude. If you have any questions, if you have any pushbacks, if you want to share your own experience, by all means, please do share them in the comments or get in touch with me over LinkedIn. Do check out my other videos on incrementality. Like I said, this wasn't the best method, of course, but so much for this one. I'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.